welcome to week 14 of Jets Final Drive. I'm your host, Jeane Coakley, and like always, I am joined by SNY NFL insider Connor Hughes. And today we are joined by our friend of the show, Zack Rosenblatt of The Athletic. And Zack, you've been on the show a couple times, and every single time it's after a Jets win. We thought you were the lucky charm.
I know. We should have canceled this last minute like we did a couple other times. I think I was looking good for a little while there.
All right, guys, before we get going, just a reminder, Jets Final Drive on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. So, guys, some good news. Aaron Rodgers threw more than 300 passing yards for the first time since 2021. However, the Jets fell to 3-10 after allowing the Dolphins to drive up the field and kick a field goal to tie the game with less than a minute in regulation and then allow a touchdown on the first possession of OT. So this is the 7th one-possession loss of the season. And while you can't fully blame Aaron Rodgers for this and the offense did have a chance to seal the game on their final offensive drive, but kicked a field goal with their remaining time and allowed the Dolphins a chance to tie it. So Connor, what is causing the Jets to be unable to finish a game?
Yeah, Jeane, there are good teams in the NFL, and those teams go into games expecting to win, and they build a lead and they carry it throughout, and then they win the games. And then you have great teams in the NFL, the teams like the Chiefs and the Lions, and those teams, no matter what situation they are putting in a game, they know that they are going to win. Up 20, down 20, they're going to come back and win the game. The Jets are not good. The Jets are not great. They are a team, and I thought Garrett Wilson put this perfectly after the game when he described the culture and the means in which the Jets are losing, that they go into games, and no matter the situation they find themselves in, it's like they're waiting for the other shoe to fall for them to lose the game. And that's why you see so many different little things throughout a game, whether they're up or down, cost this team in crunch time. It's not always the offense, although sometimes it is. It's not always the defense, although it was yesterday against the Dolphins. It's not always the special teams, but oftentimes it's been that way when Greg Zuerlein was missing kicks. It's not always the players. Sometimes it's the coaches that are just making mistakes and putting the players in poor positions to have success. But when you have a team that has built this culture that is not toxic, but just one where they can't find a way to get out of their own way, these are the things that are happening. And unfortunately, I know the Jets have brought in Aaron Rodgers as a 4-time MVP, as a Super Bowl under his belt. Devontae Adams has been a part of winners. C.J. Mosley has been a part of winners. The vast majority of this Jets team, the culture of this Jets team, it's players that have known nothing but the losses that the Jets have endured the last 3, 4, 5, 6, 14 years. Guys like Quincy Williams. Guys like Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, guys like Sauce Gardner. These are players who unfortunately don't know yet what it's like to win and don't go into these games expecting to win. They build these leads and then wait for the other shoe to fall, like it seems to happen time and time again.
All right, and Zack, the Jets have struggled in the red zone. We know that. Do you think it's the play calling? Do you think it's the players' inability to execute, or is it just sloppy penalties?
I mean, Jeane, frankly, I think it's a combination of everything. I think a lot of the times, and I know that's not a fun answer, but I think a lot of times the play calling leaves a lot to be desired when they get into the red zone. I mean, even look at that last drive. They get pretty deep down the field, and then they call a run that loses 5 yards, and then Aaron Rodgers gets sacked. And then on the next play, he audibles to a play to the sideline, and Devontae Adams goes out of bounds. And it's a lot of it's just these details that they get wrong. But, yeah, the play calling, I'll focus on that. They get to the red zone, they're number 1 or number 2 in the NFL in terms of the percentage of their plays in the red zone that are passing plays. They do not run the ball. Even though you have a Breece Hall before this week, you have a Braylon Allen, and even an Isaiah Davis who showed something this week. You have these running backs that can get the tough yards, and they throw the ball every time. And I don't know if that's Aaron Rodgers or if it's Todd Downing, but, this has been a problem in the red zone for a long time here. It was really bad last year when Nathaniel Hackett was running the gold zone. But it's just a combination of everything, and it kind of goes into the problems elsewhere. It's the details. It's these little things. It's these pre-snap penalties. It's weird play calls. It's a guy dropping a ball. It's Aaron Rodgers missing a wide open player. It's just this team is just not cohesive, and it's been like that all season.
All right, so I'm going to ask you both this. Is there a universe where the Jets win these one-possession games and are in prime playoff position, or were they just destined for a bad season? Connor, you go.
Yeah, I don't think it was ever going to happen for the Jets, Jeane. I don't. And you can play the game. You can go back even further to they
so
don't fire.
You thought that it wasn't going to happen?
What was that? I'm sorry.
I said, so week one, when you saw this, if someone had said, hey, listen, 7 games are going to come down to 1 possession, the Jets are losing them all, you thought that?
No, I wouldn't have thought that, but I wouldn't think that at all. I would look at the roster and I would see the talent and I would say that if there are all these 1 possession games, this is a team that's talented enough to win those games. But that doesn't happen. And I don't think that you can go in each of these games and flip a coin and say, oh, this ball bounces their way, they're going to win, and then they're going to win all these games, they're going to win 7 more than they've won, and they're going to be in the playoffs and they're going to make a run. I don't think that was going to happen. You can go all the way back, honestly, to when they fired Mike LaFleur and say, oh, well, maybe if they kept Mike LaFleur, hired Todd Downing as someone that can be the veteran in that room, and then get Derek Carr and not Aaron Rodgers, maybe they're in a better position. I don't think that was going to happen. I just think ultimately this was always going to fail. And I hate playing that game of, oh, they were so close. Oh, look at these 1 possession games. No, because you flip 1 or 2 balls that bounce the Jets, or take balls that didn't bounce the Jets' way and make them bounce the way in the loss. Well, are you going to flip the games that they won that were close, like the game against the Tennessee Titans when Will McDonald had a sack to keep the Titans out of the end zone where they were going to tie or win that game? Are you going to flip that one? Like, there's so many opportunities in other games that the Jets had. Well, there's really only 3 of them. But the other games that the Jets won, with the exception of the Thursday night beatdown on the Patriots, look at the Texan game. Like, if C.J. Stroud hits the wide open receiver in the end zone when they're in the red zone there, they don't lose that game. Right? Like there's so many little examples, even in the games the Jets won, that you can say, okay, well, flip this play the other way. I think ultimately this is just a team that, for whatever reason, I think it was probably compounded and amplified when they fired Robert Saleh. But ultimately, I just don't think that they have the right cohesiveness in the locker room and players with the right mentality right now that go into those games, as I was saying, expecting to win no matter what. And when they're dealt a punch or 2 or a jab in the face, they still say, you know what, that's fine, brush it off, we're still going to win this game. I think this is a team that, for whatever reason, when they are dealt a body blow or they are dealt a punch in the face, they turn around and go, oh, here we go, we're going to lose this one too. And when you have that culture, when you have that mindset, it is so hard to just break it. It's not. It takes years. It takes a slew of the right players. It takes the right messaging, and I don't think they have it. I don't think they're at an advantage on the sideline with their coaches, and I don't think the players right now have that right mentality that's going to help them no matter what if you give them a bounce or 2 another way. I think they probably still would find ways to lose games.
Zach, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting. You think back to the Robert Saleh era, and it all feels like so distant now because this season has been so crazy. But a lot of time they were coming back from being down. They weren't trying to maintain a lead, and so this is a team that does not know how to win ultimately.
And they had no expectations either, Zach. Remember that too.
And especially 2022. You look at 2022, like that was like I know they fell apart at the end of the season, but that was like a scrappy team. It was young. They didn't know how good they were, and they didn't know what they didn't know, and so. Now they have all this experience and all these young guys like Garrett, like Sauce, they have all this pressure on them. They have all this attention on them, and they have not been. I'm not saying those guys specifically, but the team as a whole has not been able to handle that very well. So you get to the end of these games, and whether they forget everything they've practiced, or the coaching isn't there, or guys are just as Garrett was saying, like it just feels like it's in their genes that everything's going to go wrong. It's kind of been a cultural problem here for a long time. It's an inevitability. It feels like some of the time, and I think they need to find a coach and need to find a GM who can build a culture where they don't go into games thinking that they're going to lose. They go into them thinking, okay, we're prepared. We're going to work the hardest, and they're going to have to really beat us in order to win this game.
Yeah, and if you think about it too, like the just real quick on this is that they those first couple years, and especially even the year where they lost Aaron Rodgers, when Aaron Rodgers went down and he was done week 1, the Jets were not expected to be good. They were rebuilding. They were young. When they were winning games and they were upsetting teams like they did against the Philadelphia Eagles, it was like, oh, wow. No one put the Jets never went into these games favored, where people were like, oh, the Jets are supposed to win these games. They went into them as the underdogs, and then they surprised some teams and won some games and played some teams tight, and you're like, wow. But there's a difference. There's a difference when everybody expects you to be good. And Jeane did an interview. Jeane, I don't know if it was for pregame show, but it was the interview you did with Quincy Williams. And I thought it was incredibly telling because Quincy basically came out and said, now talking specifically on the defense, not the offense, but it sure applies to them as well. He basically said they drank their own Kool-Aid. That they looked at what they had done the last couple of years. They knew the vast majority of the starters were coming back. They thought they were supposed to be good, and they went in there and just expected it to be great. It was almost like they lost that chip that was on their shoulder because everyone was singing their praises. Everyone was blowing them up. Everyone says, this team's so good, they're going to go to the playoffs, that they just expected that to happen. And then when it didn't and they started losing, they go, here we go again. And I think that truly is something that really did derail this team, is that they counted their chickens before they hatched, as the old cliche says.
All right, well, let's talk about some of the chickens, the chicklets, because the rookies. I don't know if that was a good segment, but I'm talking about the little chicklets. Let's talk about the rookie running backs, Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis, because they led the backfield when Breece Hall was injured. Connor, what do you think of their performance?
I thought they were good. I mean, it's funny. Like, I remember talking to Joe Douglas about Isaiah Davis before he was let go, and him saying that, everyone's talking about Braylon Allen. Everyone obviously talks about Breece Hall, but wait till this guy gets his opportunity. Like, we really, really like him. I mean, the Jets drafted him in large part because of what he can do on special teams. Like, the special teams coaches really slammed the table to get him in the building, believing he could be a real force on kickoff return, kickoff, all that kind of stuff. They liked him there. But the Jets, once they got him in the building, they saw it in OTAs, they saw it in minicamp, they saw it in training camp. They believed that this guy could be a true difference maker on offense as well, and thought they had a three-headed rushing attack. Now, obviously, you still want to feed Breece Hall. The offense hasn't been able to get going, so the snaps haven't been there to feature three different backs in addition to Devontae Adams, Allen Lazard, Garrett Wells, and Tyler Conklin, all the other names and mouths that they have to feed. But they are a pretty legitimate backfield with those two guys. I mean, I think Braylon Allen is the forceful, strong, downhill runner. I think that Davis is kind of a little bit of the everything guy that has some speed, has some agility, has some power. And then obviously with Breece Hall, he's the home run hitter. So it really is an interesting 1-2-3 earth, wind, and fire combination there that I'd like to see the Jets with, a legitimate offensive staff in place, an innovative offensive staff in place, find a way to feature these guys, because we have seen backfields use three backs as the focal point of the offense and have immense success with it. One of the groups that I go back to is when the New York Giants actually, the year after their first Super Bowl in 2007, when they had Ahmad Bradshaw as the fire, they had Derek Ward as the earth, and then you had Brandon Jacobs as that power back. They had three guys, and they used them all, and they ran for, I think both, that year was when Ward and Jacobs both had 1,000 yards running, and then Bradshaw had like 500 or 600 yards himself. So the Jets could create a very similar featured back or featured backfield. Remember, that Giants offense still had Toomer and Steve Smith, the other Steve Smith when he was still good before he got hurt, and Plaxico Burress. They had a passing attack that worked too, and that backfield. The Jets could try to recreate that next year.
I like the earth, wind, and fire. I don't know what you know about that, Connor. You're too young for that, but I like that.
I do know that a little bit. That was also the nickname for that backfield. I remember that when I was a kid. That was
all right, that was good. I was like, what do you know about that? You're a little young.
I do know the band as well too.
All right. And Zach, you just heard him talk about having the three guys, but is there a scenario where the Jets trade Breece Hall for a Hall of Future assets, and then they still have Allen and Davis to carry the load next year in the backfield?
I don't think you can rule anything out right now, just because we don't know what GM is going to come in here and want to do. And you have to factor in Breece Hall is going to be in the last year of his contract, and he's going to want to get paid pretty soon. But I would keep him. I mean, to Connor's point, I think Breece at his best probably doesn't need to be getting the ball 20 to 25 times. I think we've seen that he hasn't had his best season this season, where teams have prepared for him. And I think if you're balancing it out with a guy like him who's very highly explosive, can score anytime he touches the ball, good out of the backfield, with a really strong runner in Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis, who's kind of like a little bit of both, I think that's a really fun little trio of running backs, and it's something you can really build on. I think you look at this offense going into next year, I think part of the appeal is they have this group of young running backs. They have a young wide receiver in Garrett Wilson. They have a pretty solid offensive line. Like, that's a pretty appealing offense if you can find the right quarterback to lead the way. But I personally don't think getting rid of Breece Hall is the right move right now, unless a team comes in and throws some crazy offer at you, and then running backs are ultimately pretty replaceable. But I tend to lean on keeping Breece Hall in the mix.
And that is the thing to remember too. With like, we know Garrett Wilson is frustrated. You heard that in the post-game locker room. Zach, you were in there, and you can talk to it more. I was covering the Giants game yesterday. That disaster. So you can talk specifically to the tone that Garrett Wilson has spoken about. He's spoken publicly before about how, and said privately, I mean, you talked about it the other day, that things don't turn around. He's going to want a fresh new start. But Breece could be absolutely looped in that exact same boat. We talked about this on Jets' final drive last week. But it is important to remember with these guys that whether they kick in the new GM's office and say, I want to trade, or they go to Woody Johnson and say, I want to trade, it does feel similar to, and it is not as toxic as this environment was when this happened, but when Jamal Adams said, I want to be paid, make me a Jet for life. If you're not going to make me a Jet for life, then trade me. Well, the Jets went to Jamal Adams and said, we have full control over you. Yes, you're eligible for an extension, but we have you for your 4th year of your contract. We have you, this isn't the case for Breece Hall, this would be for Garrett Wilson, Sauce Gardner, Jermaine. We have the 5th year option on your contract as well. And then, oh, by the way, we can franchise you, and depending on your position, we can also franchise tag you twice. So there's team control that the Jets have where they don't have to trade these guys, even if they kick and scream and say, I want to be moved, I want to be moved, I want to be moved. So honestly, ultimately, it would probably take a ridiculous package for the Jets to move either of these guys, and I don't really necessarily see it happening, although that doesn't necessarily rule out these players wanting to be dealt or them going to the next GM and saying, hey, I want a fresh start. It's just a matter of the Jets don't have to do it if they don't want to.
All right, we've talked about the offense. Let's talk a little about the defense, because this defense has been depleted by injury this season, but they're still a shell of what they were the previous 2 years after losing some key pieces in the offseason. So, Zach, do you have faith that the Jets could restore the defense back to where it was in the offseason?
Yeah, I think there's a lot up in the air right now because we don't know what kind of scheme they're even going to run, because we don't know, is it going to be somebody from the solid type of defense. But, I think they do have the pieces, but they ultimately do have more holes than they did a year ago. You look at the defensive line, the only ones that you can really count on coming back, Jermaine Johnson coming off an Achilles, Will McDonald, Quinnen Williams. They need somebody next to Quinnen Williams. They need a defensive end who can stop the run. You have Quincy Williams.
JFM back.
JFM is probably their biggest loss ultimately if you look at it personnel-wise. You look at linebacker, that Quincy Williams, I don't know that C.J. Mosley's coming back. Jamian Sherwood's a free agent. I would resign him. Safety, they're probably going to completely redo that room. DJ Reed's a free agent. So, they have a lot of holes now in the defense, but you also have a core of Quinnen Williams, Quincy Williams, Sauce Gardner, Will McDonald, Jermaine Johnson. Those are solid players. Can they get back to being the number 2 defense in the NFL, which I think they were last year? I don't know. It's going to take a little building up and learning a new scheme and finding the right pieces. But they blew up that defensive line this year, and I think it really backfired on them. And they made a lot of mistakes in that area, and now they have to go. And I wouldn't be surprised if they draft a defensive tackle or a defensive end with their top pick.
Okay. All right, and Connor, what is the Jets' biggest need this offseason? Are there any names to watch out for in the offseason that they can get in free agency?
I have to be honest, I haven't even gotten to that point yet. I have no idea. I got to start that. I guess, let's start that homework. Let's do it. They're officially eliminated. I think just become this week. Look, this weekend I was chasing planes over with the flying around MetLife. So I have not admittedly gotten to the free agent talk yet. But I do think one point that Zach touched upon that I don't think has been discussed enough this year. We've talked about how the Jets miss Bryce Huff. Absolutely. He was a perfect scheme fit within Robert Saleh's defense and Aaron Whitecotton's defensive line. He was the perfect fit there. John Franklin Myers was an elite-level Swiss Army knife, an edge setter on the outside, and then a real ferocious pass rusher as a defensive tackle, the Brandon Graham type mold, Justin Tuck type mold for the Jets. I genuinely do believe deep down the Jets could have absolutely survived the loss of Bryce Huff, and especially the loss of John Franklin Myers, even though he was a glue guy, had Jermaine Johnson not gone down.
I agree with you.
That was the major loss for the Jets that in the moment after that Titans game, we were like, yeah, that could be a big issue. I don't think it's been discussed enough since, and I don't think, maybe it's because I don't know, unless maybe Jets Twitter has been talking about it, but I haven't really seen it. I don't think enough people have focused on how monumental and significant and massive of a loss losing Jermaine Johnson was, because this was a guy who maybe he's never going to be a 12-sack guy, but he was an emotional leader for the defense.
Yes.
He was ferocious against the run. He's an elite-level run defender, and he's a pretty damn good pass rusher as well. Again, I don't know if he's ever going to be the Nick Bosa, the Aiden Hutchinson, but still, he's a good edge rusher. And I think if you had Will McDonald on one side, Jermaine Johnson on the other, guess what? And then eventually Haason Reddick comes back. Guess what? We're not talking about Michael Clemens all that much because Michael Clemens isn't playing. Those are Jermaine Johnson's snaps. Michael Clemens is down to 5 or 6, maybe 10 snaps a game, not 40% of the snaps like he's playing right now. So unfortunately for the Jets, I think a lot of their issues, both stopping the run, coming up clutch in big situations, a little bit of their issues getting to the passer. It's not Haason Reddick being out of shape. It's not Will McDonald, obviously, who has double-digit sacks. I don't think it's Javon Kinlaw or Quinnen Williams. I really believe it's them missing Jermaine Johnson. And us, I think, in total, really underestimating how much he meant to this defense and what they wanted to accomplish each week.
100% agree with you on Connor. And like you said, the emotional leader, he did in that locker room. All right, well, you both, let's continue with the D-line because you both tweeted how shocked you were that Haason Reddick only has a half sack and 1 QB hit in the 6 games with the Jets. What would you attribute that to, Connor? Is that missing training camp? Is he out of shape? Is it just not knowing this?
I don't know, Jeane. I'm going to be honest with you because I don't think it's tough. Look, absolutely. You can talk about training camp you can talk about missing training camp being a key part of this. You can talk about missing OTAs and minicamp and not being around your team. But this isn't a guy who had to learn a brand new offense like if you're integrating a quarterback or if you're integrating a receiver. This isn't a guy who, if like you're a receiver, it's not like he had to get on the same page as anybody else. His job is to pin his ears back and go rush the passer. And maybe he's not in elite level football shape, but again, he's not a running back who's going to be taking beating and bruises. I mean, it's line up, you still have your athletic ability, you still have your speed, pin your ears back and go get the quarterback. And for him to be a complete and total non-factor in 6 games, have half a sack and 1 quarterback hit, I don't know how bought in he is. I don't know how motivated he is. He doesn't want to talk to me because of some of the things and how critical I was of his holdout. So unfortunately, I can't go those answers for you. But it's one of those situations where I think it's just a guy that has just been a bust of a signing. And I think there's probably a reason why this guy has played on so many teams throughout his career despite being successful on the field. There was a lot of talk coming out of Philadelphia about how he just sold out for sacks and didn't care about the run and wanted to go get the quarterback all the time. That's happening here with the Jets. Maybe it also has to do with the fact that the Jets' offense has been ineffective, so there hasn't been a lot of 2 and 3 score leads for the Jets, so there haven't been those opportunities as a defense to just say they have to throw the ball, let's go get them. Like when Mathis and Freeney were so ferocious when you were with the Colts, Jeane, and Peyton Manning had them up 2-3 possessions every game, and those guys knew we can go get the quarterback, forget the run, go get the quarterback. Jets haven't been in those situations. Reddick hasn't been able to do that. Maybe that plays a role, and he's never been an every down player, all-around player anyway, but ultimately I think it's just a bust of a signing and just a failure from Joe Douglas to go think that this was going to work.
I'm going to just throw this in real quick. Speaking of the sack exchange, a 30 for 30 coming out on Friday. Sorry, speaking of when the last time Jets had that, on Friday, it's unbelievable. I got to see a little sneak peek. It is fantastic. But, Zach, I mean, obviously Haason Reddick bet on himself, and he lost. Do you think players are going to think twice now about holding out for a new contract?
That's wild.
I mean, I think they already do kind of think twice about it because the history is not great. And there's never been a holdout like his, ultimately. I think people think of like the Le'Veon Bell one, but he was on a franchise tag. He wasn't under salary. Like he didn't do his introductory press conference for a new team and then not show up. Like it could not have gone more terribly. I don't even know if that's the right way to say it because it's just the weirdest situation. But I mean, this guy, he didn't show up for the entire summer. He wanted to get more money. He demanded more money. He gets back. The most he could possibly make is the original salary that he was going to get paid. And he's going to fall well short of that. Like he has a half a sack and 1 QB hit. He had 1 pressure on, I think, 30 pass rushing snaps this last game. And he's a guy that you watch the game, you don't really even remember he's out there. Like, this is a guy that was number 4 in the entire NFL in sacks for the last 4 years before this year. Like, I think there's something to be said about the fact that he did not train with the team. Like, you could say how intense your workouts are at home, but it is not the same thing. So, ultimately, I don't know if he's out of shape, but you watch him. Teams are not doubling him. He's going one-on-one. He's not winning his battles. He had a tackle for loss in the other game. That was pretty much it. That's the only time I remember noticing him pretty much the whole time he's been back. Like I just can't think of a scenario that's gone much worse than this guy's. And I can't even imagine what kind of money he's going to make. He's going from when before he was traded, he was asking for $25 million a year, which led to some teams like hanging up the phone on the Eagles, to now, is he going to get $5 million for 1 year? Like I just,
maybe 8.
It blows my mind.
I think 8. I think he'll probably get somewhere around 8, maybe.
Still pretty good, but not that 25.
Why did you give $8 million to a guy who's a half a sack?
Yeah.
They'll look at last year. They'll see, like, oh, we didn't have that. I think some team will give it. Some contender, like the Lions or something like that, will give him money.
So the loss yesterday, the Jets are eliminated from the postseason. So this will be their 14th consecutive season that they did not go to playoffs. It's the longest current drought in the NFL, MLB, NBA, NHL, and WNBA. But if the season were to end right now, the Jets wouldn't even have a top 5 pick in the upcoming draft. There are 8 teams with a 3-10 record or worse. So, guys, what is causing this gap between teams that are very good and very bad in the NFL this season? Which is crazy to me that the Jets wouldn't be a top 5 pick right now.
Yeah, I think injuries have played a pretty big role. I think there's been a decent amount of them throughout the league. I think there is a pretty big disparity between the best of the best and the worst of the worst. But, I mean, you look at some divisions, like Look at the AFC East, for example. Like, yeah, the Patriots aren't very good, but they're still in the rebuilding stage of what they want to do. Then you have the Dolphins, who would probably be up there at double-digit wins, a shoo-in for the playoffs if Tua Tagovailoa hadn't missed a month with the concussion. Then you have the Bills. You can go in the AFC West. You got some teams like the Raiders who have fallen back. But now, look, the Broncos are kind of going up. So I think it's just the unfortunate part of some teams just being in a rebuild. But that whole thing with the Jets picking 7th despite having the second worst record in the NFL, let that work itself out, because there's a lot of teams in the front, like the Raiders still have to play the Saints, who are now without Derek Carr. They can win them. They're still going to play. I think it's the Jaguars they got to play. So there are some games here where even some of those teams that have bad records, they're going to steal some towards the end here, and there's going to be a lot of shakeup and all that stuff. The Jets could still very easily be up there picking number 2 or number 3 in the draft, especially if they lose this Sunday to the Jaguars.
Zach, your thoughts on this?
I think the two biggest things are quarterbacks and coaching. Like you just I'm looking at the standings right now. I mean, obviously you don't need to talk about like the Chiefs, Bills. Russell Wilson playing well for the Steelers, Mike Tomlin's there, C.J. Stroud, DeMeco Ryans, Lamar Jackson, John Harbaugh, Jim Harbaugh, Justin Herbert, Bo Nix, Sean Payton. Like it's all these teams with winning records are teams that have a good coach and a good quarterback. And it's pretty simple in the modern NFL. Like you need those two things. And to Connor's point, like I think the NFL has gone a little bit closer to the NBA in terms of like these teams that are rebuilding kind of just like go all in on rebuilding and not really trying to win because it's hard to become a good team unless you have elite players and you get elite players in the top 10. So, a team like the Patriots, I feel like they should feel very, very good about their future. They have a quarterback that everybody loves. They have a bad roster around them. And so they have their marching orders, and that's build the team around them. Whereas, a team like the Jets doesn't have a coach or a quarterback going in next year. So it's, I think that's what it comes down to ultimately. There's a lot of bad coaching in the NFL, and there's a lot of bad quarterbacks in the NFL.
Yeah, there's going to be like eight vacancies? I think there's going to be something like 8 vacancies. Fire, and all of those firings were justified.
Yeah, let's talk about another bad team that happens to share a stadium with the New York Jets.
Oh, God, really?
During the Giants game, a plane flew over MetLife Stadium with a message saying, "Mr. Mara, enough. Please fix this dumpster fire." End of quote.
Very polite.
Yeah, I thought so too.
Please, sir.
Not a good time to be playing football, obviously, in New Jersey. All right, guys, I got to pick my kids up in like 5 minutes, so we got to make this quick. Are the Giants or the Jets in a better position, as they both will likely be going through, as we just talked about, rebuilding in the offseason? Zach, your thoughts. Who's in the better position?
I'm going to say Jets right now, just because I think their core of talent is pretty good. Yeah. They don't have neither team has a quarterback. And the Giants haven't even committed to firing either their GM or head coach. And I think both of them are not very good at their jobs, frankly. I don't really have a better way of saying that. And so I think the Jets have the pieces to be much better. They need to change a lot about their culture. And they need to find a GM who just really takes full control of the organization from top to bottom and, makes decisions on his own. And so I think you start there. If they hire the right guys, I think the Jets can be a competitive team right away.
I go both. Yeah, I think the Jets are a better team. They have more talent. They have certainly immensely more pieces on the roster. But I have serious concerns about what the Jets are going to do at quarterback, because Tyrod Taylor is not the answer, and I don't know if they're going to be in a position to draft the answer this year if they're picking 6, 7, 8 in a very, very weak quarterback class. The Giants are going to be picking number 1 or 2. They're going to have a chance to get their guy, and if they get their franchise quarterback, look at what happened in Washington as soon as they got Jaden Daniels. It can turn things around like that. So a quarterback erases a lot of other issues, even if you have a lot of other holes plugged. So I'll say the Giants only because they have a chance to get their quarterback this year, and I don't think the Jets will.
All right, Connor, you need to cayenne pepper and some turmeric shots because you sound terrible. We appreciate you coming on.
This is my flu game. Yeah, my flu game.
And Zach, we appreciate you coming on even after a loss. Next time we got to get a win, okay?
Yeah, next time it'll be a win for sure.
All right. Thank you all for joining us this episode of Jets Final Drive. Again, listen to the Jets Final Drive on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. We'll see you next Monday to recap the Jets-Jags matchup for Connor Hughes, who's going to go get some medicine in him, and Zack Rosenblatt. I'm Jeane Coakley. Thanks for joining us.